Alrighty, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Um, Rocky is in a wet food coma over there. Don't know what you can see because I got the screen pointing away from me, but he's in a wet food coma. He's having a good sleep there. Yeah, anyway, I'm going to tell you a story, and it's funny how things work out because at one time, not so much now, but at one time I knew a lot of people. Um, as you get older, you know fewer and fewer people, it seems. But when I was a young man, I knew a lot of people. A lot of people didn't like me, but I knew a lot of people just the same. And anyway, there were a few people that did like me, though. And this is a story, though, about how one individual wreaked havoc in the lives of three different people that I knew. And how I heard all three of their stories about this one individual. And because of that, I was able to fill in the blanks for some of these people about some of the stuff that was going on that this person was doing. Um, now, the first person is a fellow by the name of Keith. Keith's life was affected by this person. Keith was a taxi driver, and Keith was actually a personal driver for a man who's passed away now, a man by the name of Mr. Semler. Mr. Semler used to hire Keith to drive him around. Mr. Semler loved to go to Las Vegas, and he wouldn't fly down there. He'd go down there in a car, and he'd hire my friend Keith to take him there. And Keith has passed away now. Keith is gone now. Most of the people I'm speaking of have passed away. Um, Anyway, that was one. Keith died of Lou Gehrig's disease. It was a terrible thing. Actually, he suffered terribly with that. It came on very quickly, and it killed him very quickly. But once it came on, it really made him suffer. But that's Keith anyway. Keith was a pretty good guy, and Keith had things happen to him that he didn't deserve to have happen because of this one individual. The next fella in the situation was another friend of mine by the name of Garnet. Garnet was a mechanic, and Garnet was the mechanic at Mr. Semler's business. Mr. Semler owned a business called Semler Hardwood, and basically it was a big wood mill. And Mr. Semler owned that along with a bunch of investors from Germany. Of course, the investors were over in Germany, but Mr. Semler was right there on the property operating the business. Anyway, my friend Garnet was the in-house mechanic. He kept all Semler's trucks running. He kept Semler's collection of Cadillacs running because Mr. Semler loved Cadillac cars, and he had a collection of them. My friend Garnet kept them running, and he also kept all the equipment in the wood mill running. Keep it humming along, cranking out boards, hardwood boards that people use for various purposes. It was a big property, Semler Hardwood. The business itself was situated on a huge property. But that's the second person I'm going to speak about is my friend Garnet, the mechanic. He was also seriously affected by Mr. Semler. Not by Mr. Semler, but by this fellow that had come in there and associated himself with Mr. Semler. Garnet had a house on the property. The job came with a house, so he literally lived on the property and was on call pretty much 24/7 to deal with any situation that might arise with a vehicle or with a piece of equipment in the wood mill. Anyway, that was the second person. The third person is a farmer by the name of Gord. Again, I'm not using any last names here, but Gord's life was also badly affected by this person who had come into Mr. Semler's life. And I'm going to explain that. It gets a little convoluted, but I'll explain it all in a way that will make sense. Um, Now, the guy who stirred up all the trouble, I'm just going to call him Bald Man because he was bald. I can't remember his name. I knew his name, but I can't remember it now. But he was bald. He was a chrome dome kind of a guy. Well, I mean, I'm getting there myself, but anyway, he was a, I can't talk about bald people, but anyway, he was bald. He was completely bald with the shiny head, basically. And that was the guy that caused all the trouble. Now, what happened was this. This individual, this bald-headed guy, the bald man, he came, for some reason he got mixed up. He met Mr. Semler, the old hardwood company owning man, got mixed up with him. Now, the bald man was a pimp and a drug dealer. So the bald man, he kept Mr. Semler high, kept Mr. Semler drunk, and he kept Mr. Semler in prostitutes. He used to bring prostitutes from Ottawa to the Perth area for Mr. Semler. And Mr. Semler was an elderly man, and Mr. Semler was often seen with beautiful 20-something-year-old women. Well, these were all prostitutes provided by Bald Man. Basically, Bald Man kept Mr. Semler drunk and high and in bed with prostitutes, happy as hell. Mr. Semler loved it. And he robbed Mr. Semler blind. He was in there just stealing, just stealing. Robbed Mr. Semler blind. And of course, Mr. Semler, he had Mr. Semler's undying loyalty because he was the one that was keeping Mr. Semler happy. He was the one that was providing Mr. Semler with all these pleasures, you see, with the pleasure of being high and being drunk and the pleasure that a young woman, a young beautiful woman can provide to a man. That's what was happening. Anyway, first thing that happened was my friend Garnet, the mechanic, he clued into what was going on. He confronted Bald Man. Told Bald Man, I know what you're doing. I know your game. I know what you're doing. I'm going to put a stop to it. Shortly thereafter, my friend Garnet was accused by Mr. Semler of stealing one of his Cadillac cars and selling it out from under him. It hadn't happened, but Garnet was accused of that. He was fired and ordered off the property, ordered to vacate the house and get off the property. Falsely accused. He didn't know where the Cadillac had gone. The Cadillac had disappeared, but he didn't know where it had gone. And he was accused of stealing it and selling it, which he hadn't done. That's the first thing. Now, the second thing that happened is Keith, the cab driver, Mr. Semler's personal driver, when Mr. Semler went on these long road trips down into the United States to Las Vegas and so on, Keith was called up on the mat because Keith also twigged to what Bald Man was doing. Keith also confronted Bald Man, and Keith told Bald Man what Garnet had told him. I know what you're doing. It's reprehensible. I'm going to put a stop to it. Keith got called up on the mat and accused of some kind of theft. I can't remember exactly what now, but he was accused of stealing from Mr. Semler. And he too was fired and ordered never to come back to the property. This is one person has caused all this trouble now. One person, one bald-headed son of a bitch, has caused all this trouble. In the meantime, he's robbing Mr. Semler blind, keeping him with prostitutes and drugs and alcohol, robbing him blind. Mr. Semler won't hear a word against him. He has Mr. Semler's undying loyalty. And in the meantime, he's robbing Mr. Semler blind. And everybody else is getting blamed. If you confront him, if you say, look, I know what you're doing, I'm going to put a stop to it, you're going to be blamed for something, and you're going to be out. This is what happened. Now we move on to my old friend Gord, who has also passed away. Gord is an old farmer, was an old farmer. Bald man started hanging around at Gord's place, on Gord's farm. He befriended Gord's wife. Gord suspected that there was an affair, but he never knew for certain, and who knows? Probably not, really. But this fella certainly made it seem like there was. And this was part of his game. He was a master manipulator. He'd make it seem like something was happening even when there wasn't. And he started hanging around. Well, one day, he invited Gord to go up to Ottawa with him. He said he had some business up there. So Gord get in the car with him. They go to Ottawa. This guy drives Gord to an apartment where there's a woman. Leaves Gord in the apartment with the woman, says, I have to go and do some things. I'm going to leave you here, and I'll come back and get you when I'm finished doing my business. So now Gord is in the apartment with this woman, spent an awkward afternoon there with this woman who he didn't know, basically sitting on her couch, staring at the wall and making small talk, waiting for this bald man to come back and pick him up. Turns out the woman that he left Gord with there was one of his prostitutes. Now, Gord told me nothing happened there, and I believe him. I have no reason not to believe him. But he just said he put in a real awkward afternoon there with this woman. Anyway, bald man went back and told Gord's wife that Gord had spent the afternoon with a prostitute, which was technically true, but not in the way he made it sound. That caused all kinds of friction, as you might imagine. And, he just stirred up a lot of strife. He stirred up a lot of friction in that house. And, there was a lot of money there because that farm was worth some money. Real estate, Real estate's worth quite a bit of money. And even back then, when real estate hadn't gone crazy like it has now, there was still a lot of money there in real estate. And that would be the reason that Bald Man targeted those people. Anyway, Mr. Semler, he passed away. The German investors, obviously they weren't able to be around here all the time and keeping their eye on things. So they hired Keith, my friend, the cab driver, they hired Keith to look after the property until they could get things sorted out. Now, Keith, of course, was fired for theft by Mr. Semler, but obviously the German investors knew that was bullshit, because the last thing you're going to do is hire somebody who you believe to be a thief to look after your interest. You're not going to do that knowingly. These German investors weren't stupid. Obviously, they knew where the problem was, and it was not with Keith. Anyway, they hired Keith to look after the property. Now, here's where I was able to put some things together for some people, because I knew all these people. I was able, for one thing, to put the situation with the prostitute together for my friend Gord, because I knew that this fella had been providing Mr. Semler with prostitutes. I knew he was a pimp, so I was able to explain that to Gord where that connection was. The other thing was, though, this is even more interesting, when Keith was looking after the property, what did he find but a Cadillac car that had been missing? The car Garnet was accused of stealing and selling out from under Mr. Semler. Keith found the car hidden on the property. It was obviously hidden. And Keith didn't understand it. He was wondering why that car was hidden. He recognized it as one of Mr. Semler's cars. But he couldn't figure out why it was hidden like that. Well, that was the car that my friend Garnet was accused of stealing, and that's why it was hidden. Bald Man had taken the car and hidden it in order to then turn around when it disappeared and say, well, the car's gone. Your mechanic over there, Garnet, he took your car and he sold it out from under you, Mr. Semler. You know, this is what went on. I mean, so right there you can see how one malicious person caused all that harm. You know, cost two people their livelihoods, their jobs, cost one of them their home, because one of them was actually living in a house on the property that came with the job. Caused all kinds of strife in a marriage. You know, and you know, just for his own selfish interest, just so that he could rob and steal and so on. I don't think he got very much out of the situation with the farmer. I don't think so. He stirred up a lot of shit, but in the end, he didn't. I don't think he really enriched himself. If he did, he didn't enrich himself very much from that. But that was his game. That's what he was trying to do. He was trying to get his hooks into the real estate, you know. He did enrich himself off Mr. Semler, robbed Mr. Semler blind, and of course by association robbed the investors over in Germany that owned the place as well with Mr. Semler, robbed them blind too. But obviously these investors over in Germany had some idea of what was going on, because like I say, they would never have hired Keefe to look after the property if they believed that he was guilty for what he was fired for. You know, they obviously knew that Keefe had done no wrong there. And I'm sure they knew Garnet had done no wrong too. I'm sure they had figured it out. But anyway, that's the story. That's one situation I was aware of when I was a young man, and where I knew a whole bunch of people who were connected to it. Now, I'd seen the bald-headed guy. I didn't know him personally, but I had seen him around. And I had seen Mr. Semler around too, but I didn't know him personally. But, you know, I'd seen Mr. Semler a few times, just happened to be in some place where he happened to be. That's all. But the rest of the people I knew, all the people who were victimized one way or another by this guy, I knew all of them. In fact, they were all friends of mine. And, yeah, anyway, I was able to tell Keefe why the car was hidden. And I was able to also go back and tell Garnet that the car he was accused of stealing had been hidden on the property all along. You know, this is the crap that goes on anyway. You know, people, they fall in with certain types of people, eh? This is what happens, you know. And one person can do a lot of damage. Those mice here that I've been killing, you know, they can't help it. They find a warm place with food in it, and they figure I've got a warm place with food. They don't understand the harm that they do. But people are a different story, you know. People will actively conspire to do harm sometimes. And some people are really good at it. Some people make a career out of it, and that's what Bald Man had done anyway. He'd made a career out of it. And it was pretty disgusting. And I don't know, you know, the idea of hell is a pretty unpleasant idea. And, you know, I don't really want to believe in hell, because who's to say I won't end up there myself? So I don't really, makes me uncomfortable. But then I look at people who do the things that somebody like that does, and I think to myself, if you believe there's an afterlife, and I do, where can somebody like that go? If they die in their sin, if they die unrepentant, where can they go? You know, how does somebody like that get into heaven if they don't repent? That's the question. There kind of has to be a hell. You know, there kind of has to be, because that's the only place for that sort of a person if he doesn't repent. Now, hopefully he'll repent. Hopefully he has repented or will repent if he's still alive. I don't know if he's still alive. This all happened some years ago, all this stuff. Um, Probably the better part of 30 years ago now. But yeah, I was just a young man when all this was going on. And like I say, I knew each individual story. And so I was able to piece together things. I knew things that the other person didn't know. And okay, Keith found the car that Garnet was accused of stealing, you know. The guy that left Gord in the apartment with the prostitute was a pimp, you see. The guy who hid the car that Garnet was accused of stealing was the same guy, the same pimp, and the same one that was robbing Mr. Semler blind. Anyway, that's it. You know, quite a thing. Anyway, one person can do a lot of damage. You know, you look at all the lives that one person intersects, when one person's life intersects with other people's lives. And, you know, they can do a lot of damage if they choose to. Now, on the other side of it, they can also do a lot of good. Like we choose, eh? We choose what we're going to do and what we're going to be. And, you know, most of us choose on an individual basis whatever we're prepared to do as far as good goes or bad. But there are people who devote themselves 100% to bad. And that's just sad. It is. It's very sad. It's an awful waste of a life, I think. But anyway, that's it. Yeah, just a situation that I knew about when I was young, and how I was able to observe one person wreaking havoc in so many lives. All right, that's it. We'll talk again. Bye for now.